developers starting off with some sort of objective needs, objective for the building that looks something like this. They have implemented processes standards in their organization to be able to plan and assign design teams and contractors that can meet these objectives to be able to build this building. And we implement standards and processes and resources in between each stakeholder to make sure that we meet and can communicate in both directions. Design team can communicate with the developer, and design team can communicate and work with the contractor. And the same when the contractor comes on board, they can nicely work with the design team, and they can work with the handover and the facilities manager and the client once the building has been built and handed over. In this video I'm going to try to explain a little bit why we're trying to do BIM in our industry, and what it means to implement technology and processes and standards into different stakeholders on the project timeline. And to do that I'm going to use Lego pieces. And we're going to have blue Lego pieces. Blue represents implementation processes and standards that AEC people are doing. And they're going to have different shapes and forms for different types of stakeholders and purposes. So if we're starting right from the beginning with developers, we can see that developers have different standards, needs and configuration of the business depending on what type of business they're in and how they're making the money on their buildings. And this chances that one developer is going to have slightly different configurations with their Lego pieces now representing colors and shapes and so on for different needs for their businesses. So what AECP needs to do then is to look at the business need for this developer and come in and implement standards and processes that meet these needs. And the reason why we're using Lego is to illustrate that we have different needs and requirements within each organization on a project, but then the connection between the Lego pieces now represents the communication and collaboration and standards that's been implemented, that is making the need and the solution kind of fit together nicely like Lego pieces. So once we have that in place, we then have a developer that have standards and processes in place that meets their business needs, and they can then go out to the rest of the design team or all the stakeholders on the project and say, this is what we want, this is what we're trying to build, and we have an idea on something that we're going to build in the future that's going to look something like this for facilities management and management of the building. And this is the vision that the developer have for the future. So what we need to do now is to try to make sure that whatever happens in between this to that is set up and streamlined so we can meet our aims and objectives for the business. So the next step then would be to, once we have standards and resources in place for the developer, is to go to the design team and say, okay, what do you need to be able to deliver your deliverables and work in a collaborative environment that meets the developers' needs and requirements for this project, for this project. And that might look something like this. And what we need to do is to take the architects and say, okay, for you to be able to work in collaboration and meet the requirements for the developer, you need to have an implementation in your system that looks something like this. And you need to work with structural engineers, and structural engineers is going to fit into the project like that. And you need to work with services engineers, and services engineers, they're going to fit in nicely to the project like that. So here we have the design team, and the design team's processes and standards and technical resources are set up in a way for the design team to work together under one umbrella of standards and processes and resources that meets the developers' requirements for the project. Okay, so then that goes through the project stages, and stage 2, stage 3, and then we come up to stage 4. The contractor needs to start to get involved, and the contractors' standards and requirements and processes they need to have in place to be able to meet the developers, the clients' business needs to be able to build the building. They need to have technical resources in place to be able to meet these requirements. So what we then do is that we come in and customize standards and processes that works with the design team, fits nicely in with the design team's way of working, and we can then slot in the contractor into the mix so everyone can work together using standards and processes that meets the developers' requirements and business objectives. And after the handover, then most of the building has been built, we have a handover process. Handover process then meets needs for the processes for the contractor and fit in nicely with the facilities manager and the handover of the building, the built asset, to the client. And hopefully then by the end of this, the vision that the developer started with is then what we actually been built at the end of the process. We have a system in place where developers starting off with some sort of objective for the building that looks something like this. They have implemented processes standards in their organization to be able to plan and assign design teams and contractors that can meet these objectives to be able to build this building. And we implement standards and processes and resources in between each stakeholder to make sure that we meet and can communicate in both directions. Design team can communicate with the developer, and design team can communicate and work with the contractor. And the same when the contractor comes on board, they can nicely work with the design team, and they can work with the handover and the facilities manager and the client once the building has been built and handed over. And if we don't have this approach to a project, the project doesn't work, the communication of the project doesn't work, the collaboration between the stakeholders doesn't work, 3D coordination, geographical coordination doesn't work. There are delays with deliverables, what should be delivered, when it should be delivered. The accuracy of information is being compromised. And what happens now usually is that we have developers who doesn't have resources, they just want to build a building that they haven't specified on what it needs to look like. And we have design teams who work in isolation, and there's usually no real collaborative communication or collaboration between these teams. They might have a BIM execution plan that is set up with the ambition that the design team should be working together in some sort of BIM fashion, or usually in a Revit collaboration fashion. But there's no defined responsibilities. There's no defined deliverables. There's no ownership of this process, and the ownership doesn't really come in until the developer comes on board and demanding that this needs to be BIM level 2 or ISO 19650. And what happens then is the architect might implement the software and they're kind of semi-BIM compliant, or more like 3D coordination compliant, and the same goes for structures and services. And then there might be some BIM person or some BIM coordinator or some technician somewhere who are being appointed or taking on the responsibility to try to set up a 3D coordination between these stakeholders. And then when the contractor comes on board, there hasn't been any communication with the contractor, so they come on board with their standards and process, and then trying to usually muscle in and tell the design team what needs to be done and what needs to happen from late stage 3 or the stage 4. And again, it causes problems and it causes delays to the project. So it's absolutely critical moving forward now in 2020-21 that we have this system where we have specific standards and processes implemented for stakeholders depending on what type of role they have on their project. So we can communicate properly within the design team. So we can communicate properly and understand what the developer needs. So the developer can specify right in the beginning what is that they're trying to achieve, what building they're trying to build, and how they're going to meet their business objectives. How we communicate and how we prepare for contractors at a very early stage to come on board on the project, and then finally building that building and delivering and handing that building over to the developer. Thank you for listening.